we saw a lot of our friends go through the really grueling process of if they wanted to do reciprocal IVF, which most of them didn't set out to do, but if they wanted to do IVF in general, they had to have a medical diagnosis of infertility, meaning that they had to do 6 failed IUIs.
Traditional coverage for infertility is extremely limiting, and especially limiting for those in the LGBTQ community. You just heard Maggie, today's guest, speaking about how some friends of hers have had to put up with a particularly frustrating and wrong-headed policy that keeps those in the LGBTQ community from accessing the care that they need. But don't worry, today we're going to hear Maggie's story, and hers is a story about coverage that truly works for those who need it. I'm Dan Bulger with Progyny, and this is Infertility. Hello and welcome. All right, let's get to know Maggie.
My name is Maggie Garnsey. I work at Santander Bank. I'm based right outside of Boston. Santander is HQ'd in Boston.
Maggie and Alli met through mutual friends and they hit it off. And one of the things that they had in common is that they both knew they wanted children.
We definitely both always knew we wanted children. I'm 32, she's 36, I believe. And I think when we met, she was really looking at, am I going to do this alone? Am I going to do this with somebody? And for her, that meant potentially fostering, adopting. And then when we got together, we both knew we weren't quite ready to have kids yet. We wanted to date and get married and travel. But I personally felt a very big biological pull to it. I don't know if other folks feel that. But she and I both joked we started gardening, and I started aggressively gardening and growing things. And I was like, this will fulfill my need to grow something for a while.
They decided it was time to move from tending a garden to having a baby.
We looked at IUI. We really thought that would kind of be our main way to forming a family. Just to speak for my wife a little bit, and she's gave me the okay to say this, she's never pictured herself pregnant. It's just not in her gender identity, not in the way she presents to the world. And so for her, she was like, either, you're going to carry or we're going to figure out a different way to do this. And for me, I was like, oh, that's great, because I actually would love to do that. And it kind of worked out well in that way.
Quick refresher for the uninitiated. IUI is intrauterine insemination. It's where sperm is introduced directly into the uterus. It requires sperm, so the couple would need a sperm donor, and then be on their way. But there is another option that is available to same-sex female couples, and that's reciprocal IVF. With reciprocal IVF, eggs are retrieved from one partner, in this case that would be Alli, and then Alli's eggs are fertilized with donor sperm, then an embryo would be transferred to Maggie in hopes of implantation and pregnancy. Reciprocal IVF is a really great option, as it allows for both partners to be very involved. One provides the genetic material, the egg, and the other carries the pregnancy. The only real downside is that it can be expensive and sometimes even out of reach. But Maggie learned that for them, it was actually going to be a solid option.
In 2023, I was a part of a project at Santander called the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, which basically looks at a company's internal and external policies as they apply to LGBTQ folks. So everything from trans benefits, it actually has a really specific focus on trans benefits, to domestic partnership formation benefits, your marketing campaigns, are they LGBTQ inclusive? Your philanthropic goals, do they include focuses on LGBTQ folks? So I got to be a part of that through our employee resource group and spent a lot of time inventorying Santander's entire benefits program, which for somebody that has had the very good fortune of being really healthy and never having had to interact with my healthcare up until that point, I was amazed. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know all of these benefits existed, all of these programs existed. And at that point, Santander had just taken on Progyny under Surest, under United Healthcare, as a tangential kind of, you could choose. So there was two plans. And I almost was like, this is too good to be true. This cannot be. And my wife and I knew of reciprocal IVF. We knew it existed, but we were always like, that's out of reach for us. It's just financially. And it also just seemed like something that was a dream, but something that we would never have access to. And so I learned through this process that Santander had Progyny. Progyny offered this, and we were like, we've got to do it.
Having reciprocal IVF in her coverage came as a surprise for Maggie.
We saw a lot of our friends go through the family formation process and have to do, and these are, just to be clear, queer couples, both female born at birth, um, and had to go through the really grueling process of, if they wanted to do reciprocal IVF, which most of them didn't set out to do, but if they wanted to do IVF in general, they had to have a medical diagnosis of infertility, meaning that they had to do 6 failed IUIs. And these were friends working at like really competitive companies. And we saw them go through this process, and we saw at least 2 of our friends do this. And one of them did it kind of in quiet, and we didn't really even know. And then another, we were kind of aware of their process, and that was, it's really scary, I think, for anyone. It's expensive. I don't think folks fully understand that for every IUI that you go through, you have to purchase sperm. For every vial of sperm, you need to revisit the bank. You need to redo that process. And we can talk about that in a second as it pertains to Progyny, because Progyny does supply that benefit for the purchase of sperm. So when I learned that you didn't need a medical diagnosis of infertility in order to take advantage of this benefit, meaning that, first of all, my wife wouldn't have to go through 6 failed IUIs. She also never even wanted to get pregnant, so that didn't make sense. That means I would have to go through 6 failed IUIs, or we would potentially get pregnant on an IUI. But we really wanted to biologically potentially have her children. And it just was like kind of perfect.
Maggie's wife, Alli, is in the military, so when they decided to get married, they had to decide which health plan they wanted to be on. And although the military has free health care for the men and women who serve, the Progyny benefit was just too good for them to pass up.
The military has, for the most part, like free healthcare, which is wonderful, regardless of how you feel about veteran benefits and everything. It is there. It's called TRICARE. And I don't want to speak ill of that because I know it supports a lot of folks, but this was not something that we would have been able to access under TRICARE. So the fact that we gave up something, we got married, are not taking advantage of something that's free, and instead taking advantage of something through my employer. It feels like it's free because I never see it taken out of my paycheck if I actually look, but it is. And then, we got married early. She came onto the benefits plan, and then we were both able to leverage it. Was a pretty big deal for us.
Okay, so they had the support from Maggie's employer with the Progyny benefit. And one of the first steps is to get donor sperm. A lot of times during podcasts like this one, there's a tendency to kind of blow by some of these parts of the process, but finding a sperm donor can actually be quite difficult. It's not exactly something people think about until they need it.
So originally, when we began the process last March, we had a known donor picked out as a friend of a friend. And we were really excited, and then that actually fell through. So we actually learned from our doctor that it is quite a long process to have a known donor be your donor, just because they have to do like all of the testing and all of that. So we also kind of look at that as like a little bit of a blessing in disguise, in that we then had to start the process of using we actually have a known donor. So like they'll be able to, our children will be able to like know them when they're 18 if they so choose. So it's not a completely blind donor, but it's not like a known in that we know them. Ultimately, what we ended up doing was narrowing it down to 7 choices. This process at times, and I think folks can identify with this, feels like really heavy and like these massive life decisions. And we take it really seriously, but we also wanted to add some levity to it. And we also really wanted to like be open with our friends about what we were going through. And I think anyone in the queer community can like identify with this, that when you come out, when you date the first person you date, like your friends are really the people that are guiding you through that, unless you have like, you're lucky enough to have like a queer sibling, or like, I don't know, maybe you have queer parents, that's amazing, but like most of the time you're kind of navigating something that no one in your immediate circle, in your immediate family has navigated, and you're kind of like, what am I doing? And so we really wanted to share it with our friends, get our friends' input. And so we threw a little party in October, and my wife put together a slide deck of all of the donors that we had looked at, and she also took it one step further. We chose a website, we chose a donor bank that allows you to see the adult photos. So my wife did this hilarious thing where she used an AI generator to figure out what a baby would look like with her face and the donors various faces, and all of the like the hilariousness is all of the babies look the same, like identical. So we were like, AI lies sometimes. But we had our friends over. They each got to vote on their top two favorite, and in a hilarious like turn of events, they voted on the ones that we loved too. Then we chose our donor, and again, going back to the smart cycles, we ended up using a fourth of the smart cycle to cover the sperm. We also used a bank that feel like people are going to listen to this and be like, she's had this perfect life. Like, that is not what my life has been, but this process was pretty ideal for us. The bank that we used could be directly billed to Progyny, so we didn't even have to do the thing where like we pay for it and they get reimbursed by Progyny. They were just directly billed. We never saw a bill, although we had a copay for the smart cycle, and then shipped it to our doctor at Boston IVF.
Okay, so they had the sperm donor and they had the coverage. So the next step was the egg retrieval. Remember, they're doing reciprocal IVF. So they're retrieving Alli's eggs and then transferring the embryos to Maggie.
My wife is a trooper. Like she's in the military, right? So she's in the Army. She's like not really scared of anything. She's a pretty, I don't like to use the term badass, but like if there were a cooler term for that, like that would be her. Yeah, she's a badass. So, and then there's me. I'm terrible with needles. I'm like a little bit of a wuss, like whatever you want to call it. So she was amazing. Like I volunteered to do it, and I would stand there and like my hand would be shaking, and she'd be like, you need to hold the needle straight. And I'd be like, I'm trying so hard. So we created a spreadsheet of every medication that was delivered to our house. Like a live Google Doc, like what needed to be refrigerated when it arrived, where it's stored, when it's supposed to be administered, how much is supposed to be administered.
The injections are all preparing for the egg retrieval, and I'll let Maggie share how that went.
We ended up with 10 embryos, which we were like, that's amazing. And then the benefit further covered genetic testing. So we had friends that have done the IVF process, and those are, friends that have either opted into IVF or had to do it because they have had failed IUIs, et cetera, et cetera. And they've told us at that point that they were like, it's expensive. Like, we are just going to send it on those embryos. We're not going to do genetic testing. Our coverage had genetic testing. So we tested all 10 embryos. 2 of them were not great. 8 of them were perfectly healthy. I think we actually have like 1 that's not like top quality, but 8 are good. So again, just like speaking to this level of reassurance in a process that is already kind of like emotionally heavy and kind of filled with like uncertainty, the fact that our benefit layers in a layer of certainty, this like layer of like, hey, like we're going to check at this point, it's covered. And then we're going to check at this point and it's covered. It's like, I just did it, but it's like, you feel this like breath of like, okay, like it's going to be okay.
So they have the embryos in storage, and the plan is to keep them there for a bit because they also just got word that Alli is being deployed for a while. So they want to transfer the embryos when she's back home. Maggie and Alli have found themselves in a good spot, and they have Maggie's employer to thank for a lot of that.
So much of the world is based on like money and like what you can afford, and like I don't think a lot of people take that into account in their family formation process, and it's that's incredible for them. But it's something I've always worried about. I've always known that this, could be a factor, and I've always been very conscious of how much things cost and money, and because of the way I was raised, and same with my wife, and like the fact that this wasn't that kind of like financial burden wasn't a part of this equation for us for the first time in our lives. It was just like amazing.
Maggie is proof that there's a better way to do this. When you cover fertility and family building the right way, with a supportive benefit that doesn't exclude people and allows doctors to practice medicine, you get stories like this one. I want to give a big thank you to Maggie for joining us today and for sharing her story, and we really hope you found it helpful. I want to thank you for listening. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to follow Progyny, you can do that at Progyny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.